Why dice might be more important than you think in games like Dungeons and Dragons today on A Gamer's Guide to Life. Hi, I'm Bill Kenower, award-winning game writer, author, and creativity coach, and I hope you hit like and subscribe because today we're going to talk about dice. Dice, yeah, I like them. I like them, though I gotta say, I don't roll them anymore. No, I don't, because I play all my games online on virtual tabletops, which has been great. It's been great because my friends who I play with, they don't live in Seattle with me. They live scattered across this great country of ours. And so without the virtual tabletop and Zoom, I wouldn't be able to play with them. But I do miss the dice. I miss the dice. I miss rattling them in my hand, tossing them on the table. It's a very satisfying um, tactile experience rolling dice. And and sometimes you get some very dramatic moments with the actual dice. For instance, years ago, my friends and I, who, as I said, are scattered all over this country, had arranged for a weekend, something we've done many times. We call them Geek Fest, these 3-day weekends where we just hang out, play D&D, morning, noon, and night, literally, drink wine, cook dinner, tell stories. Oh, lots of fun. So we were doing one such Geek Fest. And this is played, of course, at the table. And there we all are. There's 7 of us, 8 of us there. And we're playing 3E, I believe, at that time. And oh, there was a combat. They were fighting a dragon, and it was getting nip and tuck. The ranger was down. They're out of fireballs. Everyone's low on hit points. The dragon was beat up too, but he was up next. It was going to be the dragon's turn next. Would his breath weapon regenerate? Would he be able to do it again? If he did, oh boy. But even if it didn't, he had those claws. He had that bite. Okay. But it was Greg, the fighter. My friend Greg, he's the fighter. It was his turn. Maybe he could take him out. The dragon was pretty beat up. So Greg steps up, grabs his die, and Greg is very dramatic in everything he does. So he really flung the die like a backflip. It clattered across the table, bounced once, twice, and then it did something, this 20-sided die. It did something remarkable, something I don't think I've ever seen a 20-sided die do before, at least when it wasn't done purposefully. The die hit, boink, boink, bounced off a cup, and then proceeded to spin like a top right in the middle of the table. And all of us stood up, leaning over the table as this die spun and spun and spun. And we're all waiting and waiting to see what it would do. Easily 15 seconds, which I know doesn't sound like much, but when you're sitting at a table watching a die spin, and then it fell to a side, and of course, it was a nat 20. He critted, he killed the dragon, a cheer went up. Oh, it was a great moment. It was a great dramatic D&D moment. Everybody focused and interested and waiting for the result. That's the fun of dice. That's the beauty of dice. Can't really be replicated online. So yeah, that was a lot of fun, and I miss that. I miss those clacking die rolls when everybody sees the die come up. But there is a movement I've heard amongst the Dragon Dungeon tuber community, and it's not a bad one, to advise DMs to be judicious in how many times they have players roll dice, roll for things. And I get that because it can slow the game down. Because unfortunately, every time you say to someone, okay, make an attack, now the person's got to find a die, then they've got to roll it, and then they got to do the math. Wait, what's my bonus? Am I plus? Oh, okay, I'm plus 2. Okay, so I rolled a 10. Wait, oh, hold on a second. I had advantage. I had advantage. Okay, so should I roll another die? You want me to roll 2 dice? Should I roll 2 new dice? Right? Should I just roll one? And so it's this whole conversation sometimes over one die roll. And you add up enough of those every time you make a perception check, every time you make a sneaking check, every time you climb, every time you do something, you roll a die, there's just all this math involved. And so it does slow the game down. And so I understand the inclination to say, why do we need to roll for that? Let's if they can make that jump, they can push the door open. If they got enough time, they can pick the lock. I get that in the Name of expediency, and expediency, I think it plays a critical role in the fun we have at the table. Don't have them roll for every single thing. But, but, there is something you lose if you take away too many die rolls. And so I want to focus on the benefit of die rolls here, aside from those incredibly dramatic moments when the die is spinning like a top on a tabletop. And I actually learned about the real value of dice once I moved to virtual tabletops. I play on Roll20. And like I said, it's been a godsend in a way because between that and Zoom, I can actually play with my friends. We not just play with them, but we have campaigns. Oh, God, I love campaigns. That's my favorite way to play D&D. Not the one shot, not the two. No, a long campaign where characters evolve and stories happen. That's the fun for me as a game designer, as a DM. And so one of the first things that happened when I started running games on Roll20, and it happened almost accidentally, is that all my roles as the DM were public. Now, there's a way to make it private. The players can also make a roll so only I see it and they see it, and I have them do that sometimes. For instance, death rolls, death saves in games like uh, 5e or Shadow Dark or even Dragonbane, I have those be private. Ooh, makes the tension higher. But I made mine public right away. There's a way for me to make them all private if I wanted to, but I didn't initially understand all the nuances of the software, so I just let them be public. And I thought this was, better than how I used to do it, which the standard had always been since I was a kid, since 1977, where the DM rolled behind a screen of some kind, rolled their dice secretly, and the players would just hear rattle, rattle, rattle. And the DM would go and do all the adding and then tell you the result. And there was it made sense in a lot of ways. There needed to be something private about the DM, and with the screen literally rolling dice on the tabletop would be clumsy, wouldn't it? And I'm not sure how that would work exactly, but I began to notice, or I suspected, because when I rolled behind the screen, I could, fudge things, couldn't I? And I didn't do it much, but every time I would, sometimes I would fudge it to make things harder, and sometimes I would fudge it to make things easier. And I always suspected, though I didn't know, that the players kind of sensed it. Is Bill really, is he really, is that actually the result he's telling us? Because I'm a pretty good liar, actor, I should say actor. But I'm human, things crack through. And so once I began playing on Roll20, I couldn't fudge it. Or I could have. There are ways to do it, but I wasn't doing it. And I thought it's so much better because now when the monsters hit, if they roll, say, three crits in a row, there's no sense of that Bill is cheating or that I'm taking any pleasure in this. It's just the dice. I didn't command it. I didn't orchestrate it. It's just what the dice did. And this is also just as important. If the monsters miss time after time, the players don't believe, as I sometimes would when I play, that I'm taking it easy on them, that I'm doing it because I'm afraid they're going to die. And so in this way, they earned the victory if they should have it. So the dice really leveled the playing field in a certain way. They put everything out in the open, which I thought improved the game and took away any sense that I was being manipulative. Not that they thought I was manipulative, but human nature, I think they might call into question whether I'm just playing it straight all the time. So, with this in mind, I started getting more interested in public facing die rolls. And that's when I came up with the idea of having players roll for random encounters. Now, for when I first started playing 5e, I quickly, which is what I started playing when I returned to the game a bunch of years ago, I quickly learned that random encounters made no sense in 5e because first we've got six players in our game, so that's a big party, and 5e is a slow game especially once you get to fifth level. Now, all the warrior class, all the martial classes have multiple attacks. Everybody's got a bonus action and a reaction. The monsters all have multiple attacks. So a combat could take an hour or 45 minutes. And if it's a random encounter, bang. So that's a third of your game. It just didn't seem worth it. And so I stopped using, for the most part, random encounters. But once I switched to systems, first to Shadow Dark and now to Dragonbane, the combat system much faster. And so I could bring random encounters back into it. And in Shadow Dark in particular, random encounters are really part of the game. They're part of the clock in a way ticking as you explore dungeons. The knowledge that the players have that random encounters are going to be rolled for every so many rounds, because in Shadow Dark you're always in initiative order. And so every so many initiative orders there's going to be a roll. This weighs on the characters and keep or the players and keeps the tension up, I think. So I wanted to include random encounters. And at first I would just every so often go, okay, guys, hold on a second. And I click, click, click to see if I got an encounter. And I realized that moment as I was clicking, which simulated back when I'd say, okay, hold on a second, guys, and I'd roll something. It wasn't very dramatic as they just sat there waiting for me to tell them result of whatever my little roles in my virtual behind my virtual screen were. And so I thought, well, why not just have one of the players do it? I would set up I tell them what to roll, or I create a rollable table for them on Roll20. And I would just say, okay, I'd say to my brother, John, okay, make a random encounter roll. And at that moment, I noticed something. First, John would make the roll. And if he didn't roll an encounter, the players would cheer. Oh, good job. Hey, all right, great job, John. And if he rolled again, if he got another no encounter again, if he another time no encounter, another time no encounter. Now they would start talking about how he's really on a hot streak, like someone playing craps, I guess. I've never played craps, but I know that you can roll well or poorly when you play craps and people cheer for you either way. And so there was a sense of, even though it was completely random, and obviously he had no control over it, there was still a sense of he's lucky or unlucky. And so they're cheering for him, even if it's a little bit, even if it's in humor. Anytime my players are cheering for each other, it's a win. They're not cheering for me. They don't care whether they can't really, there's nothing to cheer for or against if I'm rolling dice secretly. But if it's out in the open, now they can celebrate the result, especially when the result came from one of them. Just as importantly, though, is the fact that they knew that the result of the random encounter roll was in fact random. In other words, I didn't just throw it at them. I didn't know whether there was going to be a random encounter any more than they knew whether there was going to be a random encounter. It was truly random. And that, I think, is a really important part of the game of D&D. There has to be a part of the game that we don't have control over, I think, for it to be truly be a game. In a sport, the thing you don't have control over is the opponent, right? You have control. If you're playing basketball, you can control how you shoot and how you dribble, but you can't control what the opponent does. They're ultimately going to do what they do, and you have to work with that. And so every game has an element that you don't have control over. Even chess, of course, you don't have control over the opponent. And dice are the part of D&D where none of us have any control. And so on one level, on a game level, this is really important. The more public facing die rolls there are, particularly from the DM, the more that everyone at the table is aware that we're playing the same game. We're all having to respond to the dice equally. And when the DM's dice rolls are public, he becomes less of the puppeteer that he can become or she can become, controlling everything. And I don't think that's what a DM should be. I think it's better if the DM is something between a referee and a conductor, kind of keeping the tempo going, adjudicating. But the DM should be just as beholden to the dice as the players. He or she should have to make the same decisions. And in that way, when the dice are just out there, it levels the field a little bit. And it makes me, the DM, much more of a player in that way. And I think that's all for the better. It feels more fair. And then, on top of which, and this is the interesting part to me, it makes the game realistic. What do I mean by that? D&D is weird in that even though it's this game, D&D in particular, it's fantasy role playing. So you got magic, you got dragons and trolls and goblins, and people sleep 8 hours and wake up and all their wounds are healed and all their diseases are gone. It's unrealistic and weird and bizarre, in particular in this one way. But compared to other games, it's really the only game I know, unlike chess or Monopoly or backgammon or all the typical board games we play, that is actually trying to simulate life in some way, right? I mean, you're jumping over rivers, you're climbing mountains, opening doors, listening at doors. When you're picturing what you're doing, if it's not if your actions aren't purely coming from the character sheet, you're picturing the environment and thinking about yourself as a person in that environment. What could I realistically do or not do? This is what makes role-playing games unique. It's sort of realistic. We even have arcs to our characters' lives. They get better and stronger and they learn and they acquire. People get to know them. They have relationships. It's realistic in this one way. And the dice simulate a part of life that we all have to live with and negotiate, and that is the unknown and the thing that over which we have no control. There's so much in life we have no control over. It's what makes it for us both challenging and interesting. We don't have control over other people, of course. We don't have control over the weather. Actually, I don't think we have control over much except for our own thoughts and actions. And interestingly, as a creative person, I've had to learn to embrace this because if you know anyone who's a writer or a composer or a painter, any one of this, particularly the creative arts, the creative arts, there is an element of what we call the muse. There's a reason that cliche exists because if you're a writer, for instance, you show up to the desk and you don't know what's going to happen, really, even though you're the one writing. All your great ideas, I would say all your great ideas, come to you as if there is some being there talking to you. I mean, maybe it doesn't feel that way, but usually there's a sense of surprise. And the surprise is the fun part. That's the interesting part. And isn't D&D a game of adventure, a game of surprise? And so have these dice, these things that none of us have control over, that we all have to deal with, that we all have to react to. That's the part of life. The part that we can't control is the interesting part, the part that surprises us, the part that scares us sometimes. But embrace it. Embrace the dice. They're what make the game, and not only magical, but all of you, if you've played this game for any amount of time, and this is quite mystical in a way, how many times have the dice saved your characters' lives, your player characters' lives? Huh? That it looked like all was lost. And only when it looked like all was lost did somebody roll the crit. Did somebody roll maximum damage? Did somebody with a 10% chance to revive a dying character make it? I remember I was playing, I was running my characters. This was back in the 80s. I was running my characters, and it was the final encounter, final adventure or final day adventure in this long campaign. And my player characters had gotten sucked into hell. They were in hell, literally. And it was the final encounter. My friend Khan had fallen into this quicksand that he didn't see in the middle of this stone room, and he was sinking in the quicksand. And he was going down. He was going down, and no one could get to him. And before they began exploring hell, after they'd gotten sucked into it, I said to him, "Look, guys, you don't die a lot in my world, I know, but you're in hell. So if you die, you die. That's how it's going to be." And they all said, "Okay." And so there was Khan, and he'd been warned, if you die, you die. Like, I mean it this time. And he's going down, and he makes another strength roll to try and pull himself out. He didn't make it. He makes another strength roll. He doesn't make it. And it's his last chance. No one can get to him. And he looks at me, doesn't know what to do. And he looks up at me and he says, "Bill, look at the sword I have. It's a magic sword, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." "Could I drive the sword into the stone?" And he's thinking about the sword and the sword from the stone. He's referencing the sword from the stone, the Arthurian legend. "Could I drive the sword into the stone?" And I said, "Well, God," I said, "well, you can try." He said, "That's all I'm asking for. What's my chance?" And I said, "Well, you got a 2% chance." And because this was a game where you need to roll high, no, you had to roll low. You had to roll low. It was a game where you needed to roll low. It was RuneQuest. So the lower you rolled, the better. I said, if you can roll a one or a two out of a hundred, I'll let you drive the sword in the stone. Otherwise, you're in the sand. And rattle, 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 he threw him down. And sure enough, 0-1. Bang. Sword and stone, he comes out. They defeat the demon. It was amazing. And there's been a lot of moments like that. So trust the dice, live by the dice, let the unknown, let it be present in the game. It makes it better. Yeah, and that's what it's all about. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Remember, hit subscribe and like it. And if you say so, give me a story about your own encounters with the unknown, your own surprisingly poignant moment with the dice. Yeah, I bet you've had some. So until next time, this is Bill Canower. Keep rolling dice. Keep having fun.